What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to talk about program design. Let's get it popping. So when we're trying to plan a training program there, bringing everything that we've learned so far there and program for our athletes, several different things that we need to take into consideration. And we'll talk about all these different things here in this coming presentation. First is we need to analyze our sport. Okay, so the reason we need to analyze our sport there is we need to know what are the different things that we need to focus on in order for our athletes there to be successful. Number one, we need to look at movement analysis. So what happens to our body and limb movements? What are the common things that we see in this particular sport? As well as what are the different muscles that are involved? For example, looking at a baseball player hitting. Baseball player hitting needs rotational strength. So rotational muscles like the obliques there and leg muscles there need to be strong. Looking at Barry Sanders here. Notice here how far his ankle bends. So he needs good ankle flexibility and strength there, as well as he needs to be very explosive in nature. In addition, in this needs analysis, we need a physiological analysis. Does this athlete need to focus more on strength, maybe power, maybe hypertrophy, or maybe muscular endurance? That will determine what sets, reps, and loads we use in our training programs. Number three, look at injury analysis. What are common sites for joint and muscle injuries that we need to be aware of? For example, football players get a lot of concussions. So in order to reduce the risk of concussions, we need to make sure our football players' necks are strong. So we should incorporate neck strength training exercises to get our neck strong if we are training football players. When we choose exercises there, okay, there's kind of two different main categories. We've talked about these in a previous presentation there. But first, we've got primary or compound exercises. These exercises recruit one or more large groups of muscles, for example, chest, shoulders, back, hip, or thigh. And typically, these primary or compound exercises involve two or more primary joints, multiple joint exercises. For example, this person performing a deadlift there. He's going to be incorporating muscles around the ankle joint, the knee joint, and the hip joint. So your glutes, your quads, things along those lines. In addition, we need to know exercises that are assistance exercises. These are exercises that typically recruit smaller muscle areas, such as the upper arm, abdominals, calf, neck, forearm, low back, or anterior lower leg. These typically involve only one primary joint that is moving, so mainly predominantly single joint exercises. When we're choosing our exercises for our training program, we want to make sure that we even out the number of exercises for agonistic muscles and antagonistic muscles or movements there. Meaning we need to have an equal number of sets for the agonistic muscles as we do for the antagonistic muscles. Just a reminder, agonistic muscles are the muscles and muscle groups that are actively involved in producing force. For example, if I'm performing a leg extension exercise, my quadricep muscles are the agonistic muscles. Likewise, the antagonistic muscles are the passive muscles on the opposite side of the agonistic muscle. So for example, the hamstrings when we're performing a leg extension are relaxed. So basically, we need to have an equal number of sets of quadriceps exercises and hamstring exercises in our training program so we don't have an imbalance of agonistic to antagonistic muscles. Next up in our training program, we need to figure out how often we are going to train. And a lot of times this depends on the time of the training year, as well as what the training level is for our particular athletes. If I'm a beginner, I probably need to lift no more than 2 to 3 times per week. If I'm an intermediate, probably need to lift 3 to 4 times, and advanced 4 to 7 times per week, or even more, depending on a particular sport and how much time you're able to devote to lifting weights. Depending on the time of the year there also depends on the number of training sessions we should have per week. Off season, probably 4 to 6 or more sessions per week. Preseason, 3 to 4. In season, 1 to 3. And postseason, during the active rest phase, 0, possibly training sessions, maybe upwards of 3 training sessions per week. Again, these are just general guidelines in terms of training frequency. Exercise order. Ideally, in an ideal world, if everything were able to work perfectly there, our primary exercises should be performed first in a training session, followed by our assistance exercises. Oftentimes, to save on time, we could superset primary and assistance exercises together. For athletes specifically, our power exercises should ideally be performed first because they require the highest level of skill and concentration. Likewise, explosive movements need to be able to move quickly in order to recruit or in order to enhance power production the most. Due to these explosive movements and lots of muscles being used at the same time during our power movements, they require a lot of energy in order to fuel these exercises. Thus, ideally, power exercises for athletes should be performed earlier on in the training program. However, realistically, this order within a training workout there might not be able to be followed due to your specific situation. I'll give our situation at Whitewater as an example. Our busiest times in the weight room are usually 6 to 9 a.m. as well as 2:15 to 5:15 p.m. And because those times are so packed, because we got several teams that want to work out during those times. So therefore, we have multiple teams that all want to lift at the same time. And we only have a limited amount of equipment to be able to incorporate all those particular athletes. So I, with my football players, might want to do Olympic lifts to start our lifting session. However, if the track team and the soccer team and the basketball team are all doing Olympic lifts, while I want my football team to do Olympic lifts, I might need to have them start on some, let's say, upper body pushing exercises, such as a bench press. So they might need to start with upper body bench press, and then later on in the workout, they'll later on go back to performing their Olympic lifts. Is this ideal? No. But due to our realistic situation, we got to accommodate a lot of different teams at the same time. So therefore, realistically, this exercise order within each workout might not be able to be followed. But ideally, perform primary exercises before assistance exercises. And ideally we would perform our power exercises before all other exercises. What this chart does is it gives a percent of an athlete's estimated 1 rep max for a particular exercise and the estimated number of repetitions that could be performed at that particular load. So, for example, if I had bench press, let's say I was lifting 100% of the maximum amount of weight I could on my bench press, I could probably only perform that amount of weight for the amount of repetitions of one time. So let's say my bench press max was 300 pounds. If I have 300 pounds on the bar, I could probably only lift 300 pounds one time. However, if I've only got 95% of my estimated 1 rep max on the bar, I could probably perform 2 repetitions for that particular weight. So for example, if let's say I got a 200 pound bench press there. 95% of 200 pounds would be, 190 pounds. So if I had 190 pounds on my bench press, since my max is 200, if I have 190 and I performed as many reps as I could probably perform 190 pounds for 2 reps. Likewise, as you notice, as we go down with this estimated 1 rep max and these percentages, we could probably perform more and more reps at these given percentages. However, there should be a big asterisk next to this chart here because not every athlete will follow this. For example, I was someone who this would not follow very well for. If I had 90% of my 1 rep max on the bar, instead of being able to perform 4 reps, I could probably only at most be able to perform 3 reps of my max if I had 90% of my maximum weight on the bar. So for me, the number of reps that I could perform at that weight would be less than what this chart shows. So use this chart as a guide, but just understand each athlete will be different based on training age, based on their particular athletic makeup. In general, here are some typical recommended repetition and loading recommendations based on the training goal. So my training goal was to improve strength. In general, I should choose loads that are about 85% of my 1 rep max or higher, and the total number of repetitions performed in each set should be less than or equal to 6. My goal is power, and specifically focusing on power that are single effort events, meaning I perform a rep, reset, give myself 15 to 20 seconds in between, then perform another rep, reset, give myself 15 to 20 seconds in between. I'll probably use weights that are 80 to 90% of my 1 rep max, and I perform repetitions of singles, double, or perform 1, 2, or 3 repetitions. Typical exercises that would fall in this category would be something like a weighted jump, not a weighted jump. Weighted jumps wouldn't fall in this category. Instead, there will be Olympic lifts and their Olympic weightlifting variations. If my goal was hypertrophy, I typically pick loads that are 67 to 85% of my 1 rep max, and my goal repetitions should probably lie between 6 to 12. Now, there are studies that show we can see muscle hypertrophy with loads that are less than 67%, some even as low as 30% of your 1 rep max, and with repetitions as high as 30 repetitions. But this is just giving a general recommendation goal is for goals that increase hypertrophy. In general, we should probably pick loads between 67 to 85% of our 1 rep max and pick repetition load goals of 6 to 12. And then finally, muscle endurance, typically in general less than or equal to 67% and greater than or equal to 12 reps. Again, general recommendations based off your particular training goal. Now, how do we know when we need to increase weight? I think keep it pretty simple. If you can reach your target load and your repetition goal for your last set of that particular exercise in that workout, then you should slightly increase the target load for your next workout session. For example, if I'm performing a deadlift, and let's say my last set there, I could perform 405 pounds, and my goal is to hit 5 reps. If I can hit 5 reps at 405 pounds, I know that in my next workout, I can move up 5 pounds to 410 pounds for 5 reps. That would be my next goal. So increasing the weight a little bit, if you hit your target load and repetition goal, would be a good way to increase how much weight you're doing. Now, depending the size of the muscles that we're using, as well as how strong or weak they are, might determine how much weight we should move up in between workouts. So for example, smaller muscles, they're typically weaker and trained or have not been as trained as much. For upper body movements, the amount of weight we should increase for the next workout should be anywhere between 2.5 to 5 pounds. For lower body, these smaller, weaker, less trained muscles, increase those 5 to 10 pounds between workouts. However, larger muscles that are stronger and more well-trained for upper body, you can have weight jumps of 5 to 10 pounds, as well as lower body, 10 to 15 pounds or even more there in between workouts. As for our training goals there, we already know our goal repetitions, the total number of sets that should be performed within a workout there. For strength for a particular exercise, we should perform 2 to 6 sets. For power, 3 to 5, hypertrophy, 3 to 6, muscle endurance, 2 to 3 sets. So for example, from performing muscle endurance exercises, each set should be at least greater than or equal to 12 reps, and we should have 2 to 3 sets in total. Understand that warm-up sets, things like 50% of your 1 rep max, should not be included in these goal sets listed. Warm-up sets are outside of the goal sets recommended. Now, in order to have efficient, good work sets there, we need to make sure we rest enough in between our work sets. In general, if my goal is strength, I should be resting 2 to 5 minutes between my heavy work sets. For power, 2 to 5 minutes. Hypertrophy, don't need as much rest time, 30 seconds to 90 seconds or 1.5 minutes. For muscle endurance, recommended rest goal in between sets is less than or equal to 30 seconds. Now understand, during this rest period, we can perform sets of assistance exercises, especially if we are limited on time. So for example, maybe my goal is to increase my back squat strength. So let's say I perform one work set of back squats. While I'm resting in between, I might decide to work some smaller muscle groups. I might perform some calf raises, some auxiliary exercises, maybe doing things like bicep curls, maybe tricep extensions. Those would be good exercises to be doing during our rest period so we can get our workout done in a very small period of time. Periodization. We've talked about this before. What periodization is, to review, is have a planned progression in our training cycle going from varying different intensity levels, varying volume levels, and varying the specificity of our exercises compared to the sport we're trying to prepare for within an overall program. In general, if we're looking at a periodization program, we typically start with lower weights and gradually increasing weights over time. We usually start with more reps and gradually decrease to fewer reps at higher weights. Likewise, our technique goes to not very sport specific, to very sport specific as we get closer to our big meets or training competitions throughout the year. Now, training periods can be broken down into different chunks. So get used to seeing these terms there, especially if you're looking at different other programs there, maybe looking at research, just so you have an idea in general what these terms mean. Some training periods might be multi-year preparations. Okay? These are typically 2 to 4 years long. These are oftentimes used if we're looking at high school athletes, college athletes, as well as Olympic athletes. Other training periods, they gradually get shorter and shorter and shorter, okay, depending on what we want to focus on. We could focus on the annual training plan. So this is looking at 1 year long. So how are we going to plan out 1 year's worth of workouts? But in an annual training plan, this can contain either one macro cycle or multiple different macro cycles within the entire training year. Now that begs the question, what is a macro cycle? Macro cycle typically is months in length or a year in length. Typically, one macro cycle contains the preparatory phase, competition phase, as well as the transition phase. Typically, a macro cycle is made up of several different mesocycles. A mesocycle is typically 2 weeks long, and this consists of several different microcycles linked together. So what are microcycles? Microcycles are typically days to maybe up to 2 weeks long, and these are comprised of multiple different workouts. Okay? Multiple different workouts are the same thing as one training day. So a training day is 1 day there. One training day can contain several different workout sessions within that one training day. Okay? Training session, okay, this could be consist of several different hours of training. Any session that has 30 or more minutes of rest in between sessions should be considered as having multiple workouts within a training day. As we talked about previously, in periodization, we typically start with the general preparatory phase, follow that up with the specific preparatory phase, and then follow that up with the competition phase. This is again where you compete against maybe yourself, maybe other opponents there, working towards some sort of championship goal. General preparatory phase, this again is the first part of the training in the training cycle. This typically happens early on in the off-season phase. Our goal here is to target the development of general physical training base. This typically includes high volumes of training, lower training intensities, meaning lower weights and or lower speeds. And because we're trying to get general physical training base, means that we can focus on developing more general motor abilities and skills, and we might not need to focus on the sport-specific movements just yet. The specific preparatory phase focuses more on sport-specific motor abilities as well as technical abilities. These typically are going to involve higher training loads, meaning faster sprints, meaning heavier weights. And typically these higher training loads are going to be coupled with bursts of high intensity training as well. We might start making the rest times more sport specific in general. So with the specific preparatory phase strengthens the training base while preparing the athlete to compete during the competitive phase. The competitive phase goal is either to maintain the abilities we developed in the specific preparatory phase or slightly improve the physiological and sport-specific skills in that preparatory phase of development, while trying to elevate preparation performance at specific times in the competitive phase. So maybe around the national championships when we want to make sure that we're peaking for those specific important competitions. And then finally, we usually follow the competitive phase with a transitional phase. During this phase, training loads are significantly reduced, and our goal is to just kind of maintain fitness levels, allowing our bodies to recover from our competitive season. These typically, the activities chosen here probably should not look at all like your sport is. So for example, if you've been playing basketball all year, during the transitional phase, you might want to pick activities like easy hiking, which limits the pounding, or maybe doing some bicycle work. Typically, the transitional phase lasts anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. This slide right here kind of puts all the different periodization phases together, as well as gives general recommended set and rep ranges for your exercises there. As you can see along the top, you've got the different phases there: general preparatory, specific preparatory, pre-competitive. Then we get into the main competitive phase there. This would be like where you're starting to compete in games and competitions during regular season. And you got post-competitive phase right here. You've got the different seasons: off-season, preseason, in-season, or post-season, if you prefer to use those terms. Right here, you get the different emphases when it comes to the lifting portion for your lifts, what you should be mainly focusing on. Again, we start with the hypertrophy or strength endurance phase. During this phase, the intensity should be low to moderate, roughly 50 to 75% of your 1 rep max. Because it's hypertrophy and strength endurance focused, volume is going to be high there, 3 to 6 sets with 8 to 20 repetitions. Understand here with these 3 dots here, these are for the work sets or the target sets for your main exercises. In this case, core exercise focusing on your primary exercises. They also don't include lower intensity recovery days that you might use throughout a training portion. So these are like your big lifting days that you want to have a high point of emphasis on. These are the ones that are going to be very taxing for your athletes there. As we move on throughout the off-season there and start entering preseason, we get to the specific preparatory phase. This is where we focus more on basic strength. Intensity goes from low to moderate to high, 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max. Volume should be moderate to high in nature, 2 to 6 sets for 2 to 6 repetitions. Then we get to our pre-competitive phase. This is during the preseason, and this gets just before we start focusing on games. The emphasis should be strength and power. Intensity should either be very low or very high. This 80 to 95% of your 1 rep max, these refer to your non-power core exercises. Things like back squats, things like bench press, things along those lines. This 30 to 85% of your 1 rep max, this applies to your power exercises. So things like your cleans or clean variations, your Olympic lifts, maybe even some jumps. So maybe some weighted squat jumps there. Understand during the pre-competitive phase there in the preseason, the athletes are doing some sort of practice, so we don't need volume very high at all. So very low in nature for volume, 2 to 5 sets for 2 to 5 repetitions on your main primary exercises. During your main competitive phase, where you're involved in a lot of different competitions, there are kind of two different styles of workouts that we can focus on. One is the maintenance phase. And this maintenance phase means we want to maintain the strength, power, and hypertrophy that we've developed in the off season there. And this intensity should be moderate to high in nature, roughly 85 to 93% of your 1 rep max. Volume should be low to moderate though, again, because we're still getting a ton of volume work at our practices. 2 to 5 sets of 3 to 6 repetitions. However, if you want to focus on peaking, you really want to reduce the fatigue and make sure we're performing at our highest levels as we approach our main competitions in the competition phase. Intensity is either going to be very high or very low. It's ranging anywhere between 50% to greater than or equal to 93% of your 1 rep max. The very low intensity levels would be mainly if this particular exercise, you really want to totally drop out all the fatigue so that your athletes are ready for their main competitions there. Or you could lift greater than or equal to 93% if you wanted to have a very high intense level of exercise. Volume is going to be very low in these cases, 1 to 3 sets of 1 to 3 repetitions. And then we get into our post-competitive phase, this active rest phase. Pick exercises that are not very similar to your sport there. And this allows for recovery so that we can repeat the process again in the general preparatory phase. But again, I would highly recommend referring to this chart often when you're trying to plan out your annual plan there for your athletes, knowing how many sets, how many repetitions to do for your primary or core exercises, depending on what you define as core. Core, in this particular case, referring to your primary exercises as you create your plan there for your athletic teams. When creating your workouts there, I've talked about this slide in previous units there. Typically, you want to focus our primary or main or core exercises, not referring to like abs or lower back there, but our core exercises can be classified into 4 different categories. Upper body push, upper body pull, lower body push, and lower body pull exercises there. And with each of these categories there, you could split them up a little bit more. For example, upper body could be split up into a horizontal and vertical presses. Here it gives just some examples of the different exercises that would fit each of these categories. In addition to this slide, though, that we've talked about previously, I've also included a power slide. So these power movements should be weighted explosive exercises that you can use in your lifting workouts. These would be different variations of your Olympic lifts as well as weighted jumps. Click the link to see some examples of what some weighted jumps would look like. If you're thinking about different Olympic lift variations that you can do, okay, here listing are some different variations for your cleans, okay, different variations for your jerks, different variations for your snatches. Feel free to incorporate those in your training program. Again, we've talked about these exercises in a different PowerPoint slide set, so I'm not going to go into these in detail. Lower body push exercises, those that are knee dominant, here are some examples that you can use. Okay, if you want double-legged squats, bilateral in nature, back squats or front squats are great options for these. If you want to focus more single leg or unilateral, things like split squats, Bulgarians, lunges, or even step-ups would be great exercises that you can incorporate that would emphasize knee dominant or lower body push exercises. Lower body pull exercises that are hip hinge in nature, here are some examples. Good mornings, Romanian deadlifts as highlighted here on the right, back extensions as highlighted in the bottom, as well as reverse hypers. Reverse hypers essentially are back extensions, but your chest is on the pad and your legs are what is doing the moving. Lower body pull exercises that are more knee flexion dominant, these would be things like leg curls on machines. Might be a glute ham raise as shown in the bottom right corner. Maybe Nordic leg curls. These are done with a partner in this particular case. Then you've got stability ball leg curls, which are shown at the bottom. Understand with these lower body pull exercises, these don't typically emphasize glute development that much. So make sure we get glute development through your lower body pull exercises that are hip hinge in nature. These will help with glute development, as well as your lower body push exercises. These will emphasize glute development versus these ones where it mainly just focus on knee flexion, typically do not emphasize glute or butt development. Here's some horizontal upper body pushing exercises. Things like a bench press, either with a bar or with dumbbells. Incline bench press, as well as push-ups. Great options there for chest presses. For vertical upper body pushing exercises, things like a shoulder press are very useful. This guy's doing it with 2 dumbbells at the same time. You could also do it with a bar. Preferably for myself, I oftentimes like to program single arm overhead presses, and that's mainly due to a lot of my athletes coming in have issues with shoulder flexibility. And because of that if you press with both arms at the same time, oftentimes the lower back compensates by having to arch too much to make up for upper body shoulder flexibility lacking in many of my athletes. So therefore, that's why I typically recommend single arm overhead presses, but you can go double arm if you would like. For vertical upper body pulling exercises, we could do things like pull-ups, like in this case for this gentleman, as well as lat pull-downs. Great vertical upper body pulling exercises. Horizontal upper body pulling exercises, these are things like bent over rows, as shown in the bottom left corner, inverted rows, shown in the bottom right corner, as well as seated rows. So when you're evaluating your program there, it's highly recommended there that you take these different categories that we've talked and discussed about, and you should write in each of those categories what your particular exercise is going to fall into those categories. So when you're evaluating which exercises you want to use, make sure you take those different categories, upper body pushes, lower body pulls, things along those lines. Make sure you plan them across your entire week of workouts. Make sure that you choose exercises that cover all these categories at least once during the week and preferably twice. In addition, we want to make sure that the agonistic and antagonistic muscle groups are evened out across the week. So look at the ratio of horizontal presses to horizontal pulls, vertical presses to vertical pulls, the ratio of lower body pushing exercises to lower body pulling exercises. Make sure those ratios are equal. Unbalanced programs lead to a greater risk of injury. So again, I don't want to do 10 sets of horizontal presses and only 3 sets of horizontal pulls. That puts those two agonist and antagonistic muscle groups out of order there. And it emphasizes one over the other, which puts your body at a greater risk for injury. This here is an example of how someone might design their workouts across a week there. So you got 3 days. Notice each day we start with a power exercise. 2 days is some sort of Olympic weightlifting variation. And the second day would be a weighted jump. You've got lower body pushing exercises. Twice a week it's double leg. 1 time a week is single leg. We got supersets, okay, pairing exercises together. You've got a horizontal upper body push and a horizontal upper body pull exercise. In the middle of the week, vertical, and then we got horizontal as well. To match the lower body pushing exercise, we do a lower body pull exercise, either leg curl emphasis or a hip hinge emphasis. We got core and abdominals at the end. In this case here, the core meaning like your rectus abdominis, things like your obliques, your lower back muscles, things along those lines. What I want to emphasize here is notice how we're not imbalanced when it comes to the agonistic and antagonistic muscle groups. Every lower body push exercise has a lower body pull exercise that evens it out. Every upper body push exercise horizontally is an upper body pull exercise horizontally. So make sure that when you're picking exercises for each of these categories, make sure that there's an even number of sets there throughout the training week. So when planning your workout program there, we need to have a periodization model that we want to follow for your particular sport, for your particular athletes there. There's several different categories of periodization models, okay, that you can take a look at there. You should be familiar with these category names as well as the strategy that they follow. In general, if you follow a linear periodization model, that means one physical quality builds off of the other. Typically, this would mean starting with hypertrophy phase, doing that there for one mesocycle. Then the next mesocycle there, you would want to focus on basic strength there. Then you might want to focus on maximal strength and power as you get closer to your competition season, followed by a maintenance phase during season, and then tapering as we get to our main peak competitions there. So notice there, these physical qualities of hypertrophy, strength, power build off of one another. For nonlinear periodization, those things such as hypertrophy, strength, power, they all are trained within one mesocycle there. So instead of having big blocks where we focus on each of those, several of them are completed within that same mesocycle. Conjugate periodization means training several of these different physical qualities within one microcycle. It's a very short period of time, but we're focusing on many of these different qualities. Concentrated periodization means focusing on short periods of 2 weeks of a high stress improving one specific quality. Block is looking at sequential blocks of concentrated mesocycles on different factors. Things again, for example, one concentrated mesocycle focusing on hypertrophy, one specific mesocycle focused more on strength. So those blocks there of time might be another periodization model. And then tapering means a rapid reduction in either volume or intensity to help peak your performance for a competition. Here's an example of a non-linear periodization there across a week. So workout 1, the rep goal might be reps or sets of 10 repetitions. This goal might be hypertrophy. Workout 2, repetition goals are in between 1 to 5. This is focused more on power or heavy exercises. Workout 3, reps are focused on 6 to 8, more strength. And workout 4, rep goal is 3 to 6, emphasis on power or light work. Again, this is an example of non-linear periodization. This slide here shows a concentrated Bulgarian system. Okay, and this shows an example of what a week's worth of workouts might look like. So this is done 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Now, the reason I have an asterisk here is this concentrated Bulgarian system is very taxing on the body. This involves a lot of heavy lifting done throughout the week. Okay? And it's a high volume lifting at that. So typically, concentrated Bulgarian system should only be done for high-level athletes whose sport is actually lifting weights. The amount of volume and intensity required for these lifts there in the Bulgarian system are very intense, and because most of our athletes have practice or they've got their skill work that they need to work on there outside of lifting, they just need to be able to recover for those different skill works and sport-specific work that they have to do. So usually, Bulgarian system would only be recommended for high-level athletes who are actually competing in sports that require lifting weights. For example, the sport of Olympic weightlifting actually lifts weights. Okay, doing the 3 lifts there, or the 2 lifts with 2 of them combined together. So it's performing snatches as well as performing clean and jerks. So you'll notice in this here, they spend 30 minutes working on some sort of squat exercise. So front squat, back squat, something along those lines. Then they would have a 30-minute break. Then they spend 45 minutes working on power snatches. Then they have a break of 30 minutes. Then they spend 45 minutes doing power cleans, 30 minutes doing front squats, and then 30 minutes doing Olympic pulls and their variations. Within each of those workouts there, here are a couple examples of how much volume is actually being performed in that amount of time. So for example, during their front squat section, lasting an hour, set 1, they'd perform 30% of their 1 rep max on front squat, doing a set of 2. Their second set of front squats, 38% of their max front squat, doing a set of 2. So notice here, there are 13 sets of front squat performed in this hour time chunk. That's a lot of volume. And then they followed up later on there with their snatches. They got 12 sets of snatches, ranging anywhere in loads between 30% to 81% of their, or actually 91% of their maximum snatch, and then the number of reps. So notice the ton of volume that's being performed in these Bulgarian workouts there. Again, only highly recommended for those, or only recommended for those sports with advanced athletes, and with those advanced athletes actually competing in sports that require lifting weights. That's all I got. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a good day. Booyah.